I still remember the way she said it, like a gentle command wrapped in sorrow. "We need space," she said. Her eyes weren't angry, not exactly. They were distant, like she was already somewhere I couldn't follow. And in that moment, my chest felt hollow, like someone had pressed their hands over my heart and refused to let go. I wanted to argue, to beg, to pull her close and make her stay, but I didn't. I took it, I gave her space. I nodded, swallowed the lump in my throat, and smiled, a fake, polite smile. I packed my things that night quietly while she slept. The apartment smelled like cinnamon and her perfume, a mixture that used to make me feel safe but now made me feel like I was suffocating. Each piece I folded, each shirt I rolled, felt heavier than the last, not because of the fabric, but because of the memories I was stuffing into boxes. I didn't know where I was going at first. I just knew I couldn't stay. The city that had been ours suddenly felt like a cage. The streets we'd walked together felt foreign. Even the diner on Fifth Avenue where she laughed at my bad coffee jokes seemed to mock me now. I needed distance, something raw, something that would erase the trace of her from my daily life, or at least push me far enough that the pain wouldn't choke me awake every morning. That's when I thought about the border. Not just any border, I thought about crossing into a place that promised anonymity, a place where no one knew my name, where I could breathe without being haunted by her. I had family on the outskirts of Arizona, a small, dry town where the horizon stretched endlessly and the sky swallowed everything whole. I didn't even have a plan beyond getting there. I just knew I had to move. Her face haunted me as I drove. I saw her in every reflection, the rearview mirror, the chrome handle of the car door, the glass of a gas station window. Why does she look so sad? I kept asking myself. And the truth I couldn't admit. Part of me hoped she would chase me, call me back, plead. But part of me knew she wouldn't. She had already begun the slow, deliberate process of leaving me behind. I remember stopping at a small cafe somewhere in New Mexico. The kind of place where the ceiling fan creaks and the smell of fresh fried tortillas hits you before you even see the menu. I ordered black coffee and sat at a corner table, watching the sun burn the horizon into shades of orange and crimson. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through old messages, her messages. "I think we're drifting apart," one read. Another, "I need to find myself." My hands shook as I put the phone down. Every word felt like a slap I didn't see coming, every sentence a quiet betrayal. It was betrayal, wasn't it? She never cheated, never lied in that obvious way. But she had taken my trust, my love, and slowly dismantled it without a single word of warning. And now I was driving toward a border, toward freedom, toward whatever this new life might be, all because she wanted space, and I had given it. The desert at sunset has a way of making you feel small, and I felt microscopic. The heat waves shimmered across the asphalt, bending the horizon in ways that made it look like the world itself was melting. I thought about the life I was leaving behind, our apartment, our dog, the little wooden shelf we built together that now sat lonely against a wall, and felt the sharp sting of grief twist into anger. She wanted space? Fine. I would give her space, but not out of weakness. I would give her space and take back control of my life in the only way I knew how, leaving everything familiar behind and staking my claim on the unknown. By the time I reached the Arizona border, night had fallen. The desert was dark and the stars were the only witnesses. I rolled down the windows, letting the dry, hot wind whip through the car, carrying with it the scent of sand and sagebrush. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, the rage coiled in my stomach. For months, I had held it in, smiling, nodding, pretending everything was okay, but now I let it loose. The anger wasn't just about her. It was about the life we had promised each other, the future she had already started rewriting without me. The border checkpoint loomed ahead, lit by stark white lights that made the asphalt gleam. I could see the officers moving methodically, checking IDs, scanning cars. My heart pounded, not out of fear of getting caught, but out of the electric thrill of breaking away. I handed over my passport, smiled politely, and watched the barrier rise. I was on my own now. No apartment, no comfort, no her, just the open road and the vast emptiness beyond. I drove for hours into the night, the radio playing static more than music. Somewhere between Tucson and Phoenix, I finally pulled off the road, parked on a small hill, and just stared out at the horizon. It stretched endlessly, dark and cold, but somehow promising. The loneliness hit me then, full force, like a tidal wave. I reached for my phone again, almost tempted to text her, almost desperate to hear her voice. But I couldn't, because if I did, I would never leave. Somewhere in that darkness, I realized something terrifying. Leaving her didn't make me free. Leaving her made me vulnerable. It made me raw. Every mile I drove was a mile further from the life I knew and a mile closer to a version of myself I hadn't yet met. And in that terrifying space, I felt something stir. Not hope, not exactly, but a flicker of resolve. She had wanted space. I had given it, but now the story was mine. I would chart the course, set the rules, and if the cards had been dealt unfairly, I would play my hand anyway. I would not beg, I would not plead, I would take, I would survive. I fell asleep in the car, the desert wind humming against the windows like a lullaby for the lost. And somewhere in the distance, the faint outline of mountains promised a new beginning, or at least a chance to find one. Morning came with a brutal honesty. The sun cut across the desert in sharp, golden slices, lighting up the dust motes in the car like floating embers. I rubbed my eyes, the remnants of last night's tears still clinging to the corners, and realized just how alone I was. No apartment walls, no comfort of routine, just me and the desert, endless and unfeeling. I drove into the town where my cousin lived, a place so small it felt like a postcard. A single main street, 2 gas stations, a diner, and a lot of tumbleweeds that refused to be chased away. My cousin greeted me like I hadn't changed at all, hugging me awkwardly, his eyes full of questions he didn't ask. I didn't answer much. I just dropped my bags and let the silence stretch. That night, I sat on his porch, looking up at the stars again. I could feel the weight of everything I had left behind pressing down on me. I thought about her, about the way she had walked away without a fight, about the small betrayals I had ignored for so long. And then I felt it, a sharp, bitter twist in my chest, a desire for something more than just survival. I wanted revenge, not physical, not violent, but the kind that carved her memory into my triumph. The kind that made leaving her feel like winning. Days passed in a blur of dusty roads and familiar faces who didn't really know me. The desert had a rhythm, slow, merciless, and impossible to ignore. Each sunrise forced me to confront myself, and each sunset reminded me of the life I had abandoned. And somewhere in that endless monotony, I began to change. I stopped calling her. I stopped checking her social media. I stopped replaying her words in my head. I didn't erase her entirely. She was still a wound, but I learned to breathe around it. One evening, I drove into a nearby town to pick up supplies. The local bar caught my attention, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat. I didn't want company. I wanted a drink, a quiet corner, and the chance to watch life go on without me. But when I stepped inside, I froze. She was there. Not her exactly, but someone who looked like the shadow of her, same hair color, same eyes that held secrets I didn't want to remember. She laughed at something the bartender said, and I felt that old ache rise again, sharp and unrelenting. My first instinct was to leave, to run back to the car and drive until my hands cramped and my vision blurred. But curiosity rooted me to the spot. I watched, hidden in the dim corner, and felt a strange mix of rage and longing. It was then that I noticed the text she had sent me weeks ago, replaying in my mind like a broken record. I need to find myself. She had found herself, yes, but she had also found someone else. I saw the way she leaned toward him, the way his hand brushed hers, and I felt something break inside me. Not jealousy exactly, it was more like betrayal magnified 100 times, sharp and bitter and impossible to ignore. I left before she noticed me, driving back into the dark, letting the desert swallow my headlights. Every mile I put between us was like tearing a bandage off a wound I didn't want to heal. But I couldn't stop thinking about her. About the life we had promised, about the quiet evenings, the whispered "I love yous" that now felt like lies. The next day, I drove toward a small mountain town near the border of New Mexico. The landscape shifted from endless desert to rolling hills, pines and oaks reaching toward the sky. The air smelled different, crisp, cool, alive. I rented a small cabin, furnished it sparsely, and began the slow process of rebuilding myself. I bought a journal and wrote furiously, spilling every thought, every betrayal, every heartbreak onto the pages. Each word burned, each sentence a hammer striking the walls I had built around my heart. I wrote about her smile, about the way she used to curl up next to me, about the quiet lies and the unspoken truths. And in the process, I began to see something else, the person I was becoming without her. It wasn't peace, not yet. It wasn't happiness. It was something rawer, a hunger for control, for autonomy, for the kind of power that comes from surviving something that should have broken you. I realized that leaving her had been the first step. This next step was mine to define. One night, I drove into town for groceries, stopping at a diner that smelled of bacon and burnt coffee. I ordered my food, sat in the corner, and let my eyes wander. And then I saw her again. Not the shadow, not someone who reminded me, but her, sitting with him, laughing, the same smile, the same eyes. Something in me snapped, not with anger this time, not with grief, but with cold, calculated clarity. I realized that she didn't get to move on while I stayed broken. She didn't get to have everything while I had nothing. I wasn't going to chase her, and I wasn't going to plead. I was going to take back my life in a way that she couldn't ignore. I started planning. Quietly, methodically. I didn't need anyone to know what I was thinking. I didn't need validation. I just needed a path, a way to reclaim the narrative she had tried to rewrite. And somewhere deep in the back of my mind, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't allowed myself in months: anticipation. The anticipation wasn't for revenge in the classic sense. It wasn't for exposing her or shaming her. It was for living my life in a way that she could never touch. It was for showing her, in the quietest, most profound way possible, that I was no longer hers to define. I spent the next few days preparing. The desert became my sanctuary, the mountains my shield. I drove the roads she had never known, slept under the stars, and let the rawness of the landscape mirror the rawness inside me. I felt alive for the first time since she said those words. We need space. By the time I crossed back into Arizona, I was ready. Ready not to see her again, not to call, not to plead. Ready to live fully without her. And for the first time in months, I smiled, not a fake smile, not the one I had given her at the apartment, but a real one that belonged to me. Because she had wanted space. She had taken it, but in doing so, she had underestimated me. She had left a wound, and I had turned it into strength. And now, the story wasn't hers anymore, it was mine. The nights in Arizona were colder than I remembered. The desert had a way of creeping under your skin, a quiet chill that whispered you were alone, and maybe, just maybe, you deserved it. I wrapped myself in a blanket on the porch of the cabin, staring at the vast black sky scattered with stars, and let my mind wander back to her. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had smiled at him, the careless laughter, the touch that had burned through me like acid. It wasn't about him, I kept telling myself. It was about her betrayal, the quiet unraveling of a life we had built together without me noticing the cracks. And the more I thought about it, the more the anger bubbled, slow, simmering, and lethal. But it wasn't just anger. It was clarity. I realized she had underestimated me. She thought giving me space would make me fade, make me small. But I hadn't faded. I had grown. The wound she left behind had hardened into a kind of armor, sharper and stronger than anything I had known before. And somewhere in that realization, a dark satisfaction bloomed. I began leaving the cabin for longer stretches, driving through small towns, wandering dusty streets, just to feel the pulse of life without her. I watched people laugh, watched couples hold hands, and for a brief moment, I felt something almost cruel rise within me. The same people who had watched me crumble might never guess that I was no longer the same man who had stood frozen while she walked away. I was watching the world reclaim me, and in some perverse way, I wanted her to see it, or at least hear of it. It was in Silver Springs, a sleepy town clinging to the border where things started to twist. I ran into her again, not by accident, not by fate, but because I had traced her. She wasn't hiding. She had moved with confidence, with ease, unaware that I had followed every breadcrumb she left, every fleeting glimpse of her life. And seeing her, really seeing her, made something inside me shift. She was laughing with him in the corner of a cafe, their hands brushing again, casual, intimate, infuriating. I sat at a table across the room, my fingers tapping against the worn wood. I didn't want to run this time. I wanted to watch, to feel the full force of what she had taken and to let it fuel me. And then she looked up. Her eyes scanned the room, and for a fraction of a second I saw recognition and maybe even regret, but it was fleeting. She looked away, smiling at him, pretending she didn't notice me. That tiny moment, that split second, was enough. Enough to know she had already started to realize that space wasn't as simple as leaving someone behind. She had carved a distance between us, but it didn't mean I had disappeared. I left the cafe without saying a word, the tension coiling around me like a living thing. Driving back into the desert, I let the heat of the sun burn against my skin, a reminder that I was alive, and that survival was more than just breathing. It was reclaiming what was mine. That night, I sat by the fire pit behind the cabin, the flames flickering against my face, and I began to plan. Not revenge in the literal sense, not confrontation, not chaos, but a reclamation. I would take back control of my story. She had assumed I would shrink, that I would mourn quietly in the shadows. She was wrong. I would rise, I would thrive. And if our paths ever crossed again, she would see not a broken man, but someone untouchable. The weeks that followed were slow, meticulous. I found work in a small town just over the border, something that paid the bills but didn't consume me. I spent evenings exploring the hills, the canyons, the abandoned mines, learning the land like it was a part of me. Each day I pushed further, each night I reflected on what had been taken and what I had left behind. And yet the memory of her lingered, a persistent shadow. I couldn't erase her, not entirely. I didn't want to erase her. I wanted to convert that memory into fuel, into strength. Every laugh I had forgotten to enjoy, every moment I had taken for granted, became ammunition. And somewhere in the back of my mind, the dark truth settled. I wanted her to see me like this. Not hurt, not pleading, but elevated, unbroken, untouchable. Then came the call. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Something told me to ignore it, to leave the past buried. But the voice on the other end shattered that caution. "Are you near Silver Springs?" Her voice, calm, steady, but there was a tremor beneath the surface, a hint of uncertainty. She didn't know I was here. I stayed silent, listening, savoring the power of my anonymity. I need to talk," she said, and suddenly I realized the roles had reversed. She was the one seeking space, but now she was the one seeking answers. She had crossed lines she hadn't expected, and now the weight of it was hers alone. I didn't answer. I just let the line go silent. Let her realize that space had consequences, that absence was as sharp as any blade. For days after that, I thought about calling her back, thought about explaining myself, thought about everything we had been and everything we had lost. But then I remembered the nights I had spent driving across deserts, the moments I had stolen from the past, the reclamation of my own life. I couldn't let her intrusion disrupt what I had rebuilt. And then it hit me. The ultimate revenge wasn't confrontation. It wasn't shouting, crying, or pleading. It was indifference. It was living a life so full, so untouchable, that she would see it and realize what she had lost, what she had abandoned. That alone would haunt her more than any words I could speak. The following weeks were a testament to that philosophy. I immersed myself completely in the life I had carved out: mountain hikes at dawn, small-town friendships that were honest and uncomplicated, the quiet thrill of learning new skills, new routines. I became a version of myself she could never predict, a version she couldn't touch, a version she could only watch from a distance and regret. And yet, despite all that, I still felt the pull. The pull of betrayal, the sting of what had been, the flicker of emotions that refused to fully die. It was a delicate balance, this life I was building, a balance between embracing independence and acknowledging the wounds that had fueled it. I didn't know when she would appear again, or if she would. But I did know one thing: the story was mine now. And every choice, every step, every breath was mine to write. Because she had wanted space. She had crossed the line. And in doing so, she had unleashed something she could never control, me, fully awake, fully alive, and no longer hers in any sense. Weeks blurred into months. The desert had become my sanctuary, my proving ground. Every morning, the sun burned hotter, the roads stretched longer, and the nights were colder, but I had begun to thrive in the silence. I was no longer the man she had left behind, no longer the one who begged for her attention or swallowed her words. I had become someone untouchable, someone forged in solitude and betrayal. And yet, despite the distance, I could feel her presence like a shadow at the edge of my life. Not physically, not directly, but in the whispers of the wind, in the small towns I passed through, in the echoes of her laughter I could almost hear behind closed doors. It wasn't healthy, and I knew it, but it was unavoidable. She had left her mark, indelible and raw, and I carried it like armor, but also like a wound that refused to heal. Then came the news. It was a text, brief and deliberate, with no warning. "I need to see you. Alone, it's important." No explanation, no apology, nothing. And in that instant, every careful step I had taken to protect myself threatened to unravel. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let the message sit unread in the shadows of my phone. But curiosity, that dangerous, delicious curiosity, won. I drove toward the town she had named, the same town where I had glimpsed her with him months ago. The road wound through canyons and cliffs, the sky an endless expanse of bruised purple and gold. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, but my mind raced. What could she possibly want? Redemption? Closure? Or something else entirely? When I arrived, she was there, waiting on the edge of the small park, her hair pulled back, her posture rigid but fragile, like she was bracing herself for something she couldn't fully control. And the moment she saw me, I saw the flicker of recognition, the shock, and dare I say it, the guilt that had never fully left her eyes. "Why now?" I asked, my voice low, steady. The words carried months of anger, betrayal, and survival, all folded into one. She looked away, tracing a line in the dirt with her boot. I messed up. Her words faltered, the confession incomplete. She had always been good at leaving things unsaid, at letting the silence speak louder than any apology ever could. I stepped closer, my shadow falling over her in the fading light. "You wanted space. I gave it. I left. You think that undoes what you did?" She swallowed hard, her eyes glistened, but not with tears yet. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought space would fix things, but it didn't. It never does. She stopped, unable to finish. I wanted to scream. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to let everything spill out. The months of isolation, the nights spent staring at the sky wondering if I would ever feel whole again. But I didn't. I had learned something essential in the desert. Survival demanded control, demanded restraint, demanded that you rise above the chaos others leave behind. I took a deep breath. "Do you know what I've learned while you were, wherever you were? That life doesn't wait for anyone. That people who abandon you don't get the privilege of watching you break. And I didn't break." Her eyes filled with tears then, unguarded, honest, raw. She had never seen me like this, not truly. Not the man forged from betrayal, the man who had risen from the ashes of our past. "I know," she whispered. "I see that now." And in that moment, I understood the final, bitter truth. I didn't need her forgiveness. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her at all. What I had needed, and what I had gained, was myself. My independence, my strength, my life. But the story wasn't over yet. She took a step closer, hesitated, then spoke with a tremor in her voice I had never heard before. "Can we talk, really talk, about us?" I looked at her, the woman I had loved, the woman who had betrayed me, and the woman who had tried to erase me from her life. I could see the vulnerability beneath the surface, the desperate need to reconnect, to reconcile, to repair something that might never be repairable. And then I smiled. Not the weak, pleading smile I had given her before, not the sad, desperate one that had haunted my nights. I smiled with the weight of survival behind it, with the power of self-possession, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had endured the storm and come out untouchable. "I don't know if we can fix us," I said slowly. "But I do know one thing, you don't get to hurt me again. Not ever. I am not the same man who waited for you to return. I am not the man who bends. I am me, and that's more than you ever gave me space to be." Tears spilled freely from her eyes then, unrestrained, trembling, and in that instant I felt the old ache of love mix with the sharp sting of betrayal. She had wanted space, yes, but the man standing before her now was no longer the one she could shape or control. She had unleashed him, and he had become unstoppable. For hours we stood there, not speaking, letting the silence do the talking. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery reds and bruised purples, as if the world itself understood the gravity of that moment. And in that silence, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't action. It's survival. It's thriving in the wake of betrayal. It's living a life so full and untouchable that the person who left you realizes the cost of what they abandoned. Finally, she whispered, almost to herself, I lost you." And I didn't reply. Because she had. Because I had taken my space, my freedom, my life. And in doing so, I had crossed every border she thought could hold me, every limit she had imposed, every expectation she had tried to define. I walked away that night, leaving her standing there in the dying light, and I felt lighter than I had in months. The desert wind carried me forward, the stars above watching silently, witnesses to the rebirth of a man who had been betrayed but refused to be broken. She had wanted space. I had taken it, and in taking it, I had found everything. The desert was quiet that night, almost painfully so, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dust, a reminder that life went on even when everything inside you had changed. I drove without destination, letting the road decide my path, letting the silence of the night settle deep in my bones. I thought about her, the way she had walked away, the way she had taken space as if it were a gift and not a challenge. I remembered the apartment, the small shared life we had built, the promises we had whispered in the dark. And I remembered the betrayal, the slow erosion of trust, the quiet detachment that had left me feeling like a stranger in my own life. But now, months later, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. Not the cruel, vengeful kind, but the steady, unshakable power that comes from surviving and reclaiming yourself. I had crossed borders, literally and metaphorically, and I had found something far more valuable than any apology or reconciliation. I had found myself. When dawn broke, I parked on a high ridge overlooking the valley below. The sky was painted in shades of violet and gold, the mountains glowing like molten metal in the early light. I stepped out of the car, letting the wind whip around me, and felt the weight of everything lift slightly. For the first time since she had said those words, "We need space," I felt free. I reached into my bag and pulled out my journal. The pages were filled with months of reflection, anger, heartbreak, and growth. I flipped to the last empty page and paused. What did I want to write? Closure, revenge, or simply truth? I wrote slowly, deliberately, letting each word carve itself into the paper. She wanted space. I gave it, I left. And in leaving, I found life beyond her shadow. I survived. I thrived. I am no longer hers to touch, to define, or to diminish. And in that, I am whole. I didn't know if she would ever understand. Maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't. And I realized it didn't matter. The story was mine now, every choice, every mile, every scar a testament to what I had endured and what I had become. Later that day, I drove into a small town for supplies, the streets buzzing quietly with life. Families moved along sidewalks, couples held hands, strangers greeted each other with smiles. I realized I wasn't searching for her anymore, not for reconciliation, not for apology, not for validation. I was searching for life itself, for experience, for moments that were mine and mine alone. And then I saw her, across the street, waiting at a crosswalk. She froze when she saw me. Her eyes widened, and I caught that same flicker of recognition from before, the one that always carried a mixture of shock, guilt, and longing. She opened her mouth, probably to speak, but I didn't stop to listen. I didn't rush to her. I didn't need to. Because she had lost me. I kept walking, letting the distance between us grow with every step. Her voice followed me, faint and desperate, but I didn't look back. I had learned that closure isn't given, it's taken. And mine was already claimed, built from months of courage, self-reliance, and the raw beauty of surviving betrayal. By nightfall, I was back at my cabin, the mountains silhouetted against a sky full of stars. I lit a fire, the flames dancing like the life I had carved out for myself. The silence was no longer suffocating. It was comforting, filled with possibility and freedom. I poured a drink, the amber liquid catching the firelight, and raised it silently to the stars. To the desert that had witnessed my rebirth. To the road that had carried me away from everything familiar. To the betrayal that had broken me, only to make me stronger. I thought about the future, not about her, not about what could have been, about me, about the person I had become. And in that thought, I felt a satisfaction so deep it was almost sacred. The kind that doesn't scream or demand attention, but settles quietly into your soul, telling you that you are enough, that you have survived, that you are free. Somewhere far behind me, I imagined her walking home, realizing in the quiet hours of the night what she had lost. Perhaps the sting of regret would haunt her. Perhaps she would wonder where I had gone, what I had become, how I had taken the space she demanded and transformed it into something unstoppable. And I didn't need her to know. I only needed myself to see it. The fire crackled, the desert wind hummed through the canyons, and I smiled, truly smiled for the first time in months. Not for her, not for anyone else. For me, for the life I had reclaimed. For the man I had become when betrayal tried to break me and I refused. And in that moment, I understood the ultimate truth. Giving her space wasn't weakness. Leaving wasn't failure. Betrayal wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The beginning of everything I could be without her shadow looming over me. I fell asleep under the stars that night, the fire burning low, the desert around me alive and infinite. And I dreamed not of her, but of myself, strong, free, and unshakable. The road ahead was mine. The choices were mine. The story was mine. She had said, "We need space." I had taken it, and in taking it, I had found everything. Everything. The dawn rose again, bright and unstoppable, painting the desert in hues of gold and promise. And I drove on, leaving nothing behind except the echoes of a past that could no longer touch me, crossing every border, every limit, every expectation, and stepping fully into the life I had fought to claim. The man who had once waited, hurt, and stumbled was gone. What remained was stronger, wiser, untouchable. And somewhere deep in the desert wind, I could almost hear the faint whisper of triumph, the quiet satisfaction of survival, and I knew I would never look back. Because I was free. And that freedom was mine forever.